All right, and with that, thank you all for joining me here today. My name is John McNair. I am a historical interpreter for Arlington County Department of Parks and Recreation. So primarily my job is concerned with history outreach programs that involve Arlington County parks. Usually I'm based out of my current location here at Fort C.F. Smith Park, but today I am also coming to you live over Microsoft Teams so we can talk about some other historic highlights of Arlington County that we might not usually get a chance to do under normal circumstances. Now, today's program is a big one. Today, we are highlighting the life, the legacy, and the world of one of Arlington County's probably most important citizens. I'm speaking, of course, about the life of Selina Norris Gray. Now, we are talking about Selina Norris Gray tonight for a couple reasons. First off is she is becoming very relevant to the Arlington County Park family. On April 18th, 2020, the Arlington County Board formally proved the name Selina Gray Square as the name for a new park to be built off of Columbia Pike, adjacent to a series of new residential structures that are going up. Selina Gray Square is going to contain, among other things, benches, amenities, and a plaque that gives a brief overview of her life. So because this is the newest name in the park family, we, with the Conservation and Interpretation Unit, wanted to take a little bit of time tonight to just get people oriented to Selina Norris Gray. Who was she, and why was she so important that she is now getting a park named after her? Well, that is a simple question, and in some ways it's a complicated question, because to look at the importance of the Selina Norris Gray legacy, you have to consider a number of different pieces of Arlington County's somewhat checkered history. To truly understand Selina Norris Gray, we have to go back in time. We have to go back in time to an era which the life of a woman like Selina Norris Gray very much could be held in question. And as such, her ability to overcome her circumstances and leave a lasting impact on the national good is something that we are going to feel to the modern day in places far reaching from Arlington County. So with that, we will begin. All right. So Selina Norris Gray is going to be born at the Arlington estate in 1823. Now, this is important for a couple reasons. First off, Selina Norris, as she is born, is a second-generation slave of the Arlington estate. That means that her parents were part of the original group of enslaved persons brought to Arlington during its construction under the oversight of George Washington Parke Custis. So Selina Norris has very deep roots in Arlington County. You could make the argument that her roots in the Arlington estate run even deeper than that of the Custis family or that of the later residents, the Lee family. Now, Selina Norris is going to begin her life. Excuse me. There we go. Apologies there. So Selina Norris is going to begin her life in slavery at the Arlington estate. As she grows, she is going to become a maid in the Lee household to the George Washington Parke Custis's daughter, Mary Anna Custis, and eventually she is going to become the head housekeeper for the Arlington estate. Now, with that position is going to come a fair amount of responsibility. For one, she has oversight over an area that isn't necessarily going to be granted to someone of her station. On the other hand, this is also going to grant her access to the Custis family. Something that we're going to learn, particularly from the children of Selina Norris, is that much of her family's upbringing is going to happen inside the Arlington estate. Her children are going to speak about growing up interacting with the Lee Custis children, sometimes playing with them, sometimes learning alongside of them. And it's going to create the picture of a family that is very much tied to the Arlington house. Now, while that might seem like a somewhat safe and simple life for an enslaved family in Arlington County, it does still carry with it the dangers of the time and of the place. To truly understand exactly how the Norris Gray family is going to be brought up within Arlington, you have to look at slavery in Arlington County as a whole. Now, then known as Alexandria County, slavery was in something of a transitionary period. At the time of Selina Norris's birth, Alexandria County is starting to transition away from the cash crops, the tobacco, the large scale commercial farming that dominated much of Virginia and ultimately much of the South. Now, that being said, though, you should not accept this idea that slavery is somehow on the decline in this area. It is not so much that slavery is on the decline as it is being moved around. If you want to look at other slave experiences in Arlington for context, you need look no further than just a few miles away at the residence of the Powell family. Now, at the Powell family is another enslaved maid by the name of Hagar Randall. Hagar Randall also has the same level of trust and respect that Selina Norris seems to have, although she does not have the same level of closeness with the Powell family that Selina does with the Lee Custis family. To put a finer point on that, Hagar Randall will later claim in the 1870s that prior to the Civil War, the Powell family actually sold 3 of her daughters southward to Louisiana. That is the fate that can easily befall an enslaved family in Alexandria County. When slavery is no longer the wholesale business in the county, suddenly the status of enslaved families is very up in the air. The simplest change of fortunes to a slaveholding family could cause the enslaved families under them to be separated at a moment's notice and to disappear from the history books altogether. At my current location of Fort C.F. Smith Park, we have the perfect example of this. In 1850, the park that I work at was owned by a man named William Jewell. In 1850, William Jewell had 6 enslaved persons working on his property. By 1860, William Jewell is dead, his son Henry Jewell manages the property, and there are only 3 enslaved persons working the property, none of whom seem to be the same people on the inventory in 1850. So this is a very uncertain time for enslaved families in Arlington County. A lot of times, personal ties to the relations of the slaveholding household could be the only thing that keeps you and your family together. And for a family like Selina Norris's, this is doubly important when you consider that Arlington County or Alexandria County is her home. This is where she is brought up. This is where she brings up her family, and this could very well be where she wishes to stay. Now, Selina Norris will ultimately marry a field hand and handyman from the Arlington estate named Thornton Gray. Thornton Gray is another enslaved member of the Arlington household. Together, the 2 of them are going to raise 8 children in bondage under the Lee Custis family. Now, the event that we most know Selina Norris Gray for is going to happen during the American Civil War, when the fortunes of the Arlington estate and the Lee Custis family are really going to change. Now, on May 15th, 1861, the Lee family is going to evacuate the Arlington estate. As they do so, they are going to entrust the keys to Arlington to Selina Norris Gray. As the head housekeeper, she is now the de facto head of household while the Lees are away. But perhaps more important than the keys to the Arlington estate, Selina Norris Gray is also left in charge of a collection of artifacts left to the Custis family by George Washington, founding father and first president of the United States. Arlington Estate was constructed by George Washington Park Custis, who was an adopted son of George Washington, and who wanted the Arlington Estate to be a living memorial to the memory of Washington. So, Selina Norris Gray is now tasked with preserving a large chunk of American national memory right at a time when the building that this collection is being kept in, is within the crosshairs of two competing armies. Now, on May 24th, 1861, just a few hours after the people of Virginia formally vote to secede from the Union and join the Confederate States of America, Selina Norris Gray is going to be quite possibly one of the first people in the state of Virginia to communicate with the Union Army. In the early morning hours of May 24th, 1861, Arlington House is going to be one of the first targets for a sweeping column of Union soldiers entering Arlington County by night to try and occupy as much of the high ground as possible. As the Arlington House is one of the major landmarks in the area, that is one of the first places that they are going to go. Major General Charles Sandford of the New York State Militia is one of the ranking Army officers in this marching movement through Alexandria County. And one of his first stops is the Arlington Estate. Now, he makes a couple points in his military report about his time at Arlington in those early morning hours. First thing he's going to say is that he almost immediately establishes the Arlington House as his headquarters. The next thing he's going to say is that while he is at Arlington, he is going to have a conversation with, in his words, some of the servants who are going to discuss with him the state of the Lee family. Sandford is going to be very upfront that he would have protected the Lee Custis family had they remained, and that he now considers it his duty to protect the house as well. Now, the nature of this conversation seems to imply that he's not just talking to anyone at the Arlington estate. He's probably talking to someone who both cares about the property, has a close relationship to the Lees, and can let him into the front door. So within hours of the Union Army entering the newly seceded state of Virginia, Selina Norris Gray could very well be one of the first Virginians to talk to one of the senior-most Union Army officers now entering the state. Arlington Estate is going to remain a Union Army headquarters in Virginia for the duration of the war. Now, for much of the time, it is going to be the headquarters of one of the men in this picture, General Irvin McDowell. Now, to find General Irvin McDowell, simply look at the second step from the bottom, where you will find three Army officers standing in a row. The centermost Army officer seems to be standing in profile, staring off to the left-hand side of the picture. That man is General Irvin McDowell. Now, while we might just be speculating about Selina Norris Gray's conversations with General Sandford, we do know for a fact that she speaks rather heavily with General McDowell. And the conversation she has with General McDowell is very important. By December of 1861, months after the Union Army's initial occupation, it becomes apparent to Selina Norris Gray that some of the Washington treasures housed at the Arlington estate have gone missing, likely the result of looters from the Federal Army. Now, her dedication to protecting these treasures is going to compel her to actually write a letter to Irvin McDowell in which she essentially asks him to put the Washington artifacts into federal protection and to officially take the keys of the Arlington estate, thus completing the transition of ownership to the Union Army. The task of protecting the Washington treasures is so difficult for Irvin McDowell after he is initially contacted by Selina Norris Gray that in December of 1861, the remaining Washington artifacts are going to be moved to the District of Columbia, where they will be housed in the Patent Office. So for the remainder of the war, the treasures of George Washington are now safe from Union plunder. It is a fate that many Virginians fear for some of the more prominent Virginia founding fathers who have properties scattered across the state. We're fortunate because Selina Norris Gray's quick thinking meant that the treasures connected to our first president do not befall the same fate as some of the others. Now, while that might be the moment of national significance for Selina Norris Gray, she keeps an enduring legacy all across Arlington County in the years to come. Following the American Civil War, the Gray family is going to purchase a few acres of land in the neighborhood of what we now call Green Valley or Knock in South Arlington. They are going to become one of the most prominent local families of one of the state of Virginia's oldest free African American communities. With roots that date back prior to the Civil War, Green Valley has an impressive pedigree, and the Gray family is going to contribute to that in the years to come. Now, to look at just a couple ways in which the Selina Norris Gray legacy has reverberated across the county, for starters, you need look no further than the modern day Arlington House or the Arlington National Cemetery. In the 1920s and the 1930s, the National Park Service began the process of renovating the Arlington House. At the same time, they began to acquire as much information as they could about the Lee family that was there at the house. They tried to acquire as much information as they could about where certain buildings were certain outbuildings were located, where certain pieces of furniture were displayed, and just simply what life was like during those moments that led to the American Civil War. At this point, the best source of information for those stories comes from the Gray children, many of whom at that point were still alive and still living in Arlington. So through interviews, through just eyewitness testimony, the Gray family is able to help the National Park Service recreate the Arlington lifestyle that many people now travel across the country and indeed across the world to visit. Now, the national significance of Selina Norris Gray's work doesn't end with the Arlington House, because many of the pieces that she helped save from the Union plunder are now available to be seen by audiences on display in museums across the country. One of the more famous examples is George Washington's tent. The canvas for George Washington's tent was one of those artifacts that Selina Norris Gray saved. For the longest time, it was on display at the Valley Forge National Military Park in Pennsylvania, and is now currently on display at the American Museum of the Revolutionary War in Philadelphia. So the living memorial to George Washington that George Washington Parke Custis first envisioned when he had Arlington constructed has grown leaps and bounds beyond that of which even he could have imagined. Now people in different states can bask in the Washington artifact collection, and we only have those because of Selina Norris Gray. Now, even at the most local levels here in Arlington, the Gray family has left a very important mark. Just outside, just within the Green Valley neighborhood, we have the house of Harry W. Gray, one of the Gray children. Now, this house is currently on the Register of National Historic Places. It is built in 1881 and is one of the few examples of a brick block house that you can find in Arlington County. The location for Selina Gray Square was chosen in part because of its relatively close proximity to the Gray House right off of Columbia Pike. Now, I know this is just a very brief introduction into the life of Selina Norris Gray. There is a lot more to talk about, but really, we just want to give you guys an introduction. We want you to walk away from today knowing a little bit more about the namesake of one of our newest parks and maybe building an interest in learning where you want to explore more. So for the duration of our program, I would be more than happy to open things up to questions. If you have a question for me, feel free to type it into the text box and I'll try to answer it as best as I can. If not, then I really hope you enjoyed this little introduction, and we certainly hope to see you again soon. All right. All right, now for this, I'm going to stop sharing really quickly. Okay, so we've got our first question from Lilo, who asks, did Miss Gray continue to live at Arlington House while the Union forces inhabited it? Yes, she did, but not in the house as we understand it. She and her family lived in the southern slave quarters of the Arlington estate. By the standards of slave quarters that we see in the state of Virginia, the Lee Custis slave quarters at Arlington were considered much more advanced than what was considered the norm. However, they were still a secondary outbuilding. All right. Next from Tracy. Question about the Harry Gray house. You know what? I actually believe you were right. I think I got my information crossed there. If we can pull that up really quickly. Yes, so the exact location of the Harry Gray house is... failing me. Well, my document will not open up. However, simple answer is yes, it is off of Columbia Pike, but I don't think it gets that far south. So I believe I did misspeak there. Okay, question from Tracy. When do you think the park will be open? Again, very good question. Right now, I do not have a solid answer for that. Everything is still in the early development phases, as I understand it. Now, the park in question is also privately owned but publicly accessible, so there are a couple other hands in the development as well. If you have any sense of curiosity about when this park or other parks are going to reopen or become available, please keep an eye on the Arlington County e-newsletters because they are usually quite good about providing speedy updates in these matters. right, folks. Well, if there are no further questions, then I think we're okay to leave a little bit early tonight. Again, thank you all so much for supporting the program here. Ah, do we know where when she passed away and when she is buried? Another good question. So for the death date, it's a little unsure, although we believe it happened sometime in or around 1907. Now, as to her burial place, that is a complete mystery. I left that out of the program for a reason. I am not good at speculating on that sort of thing. I do know that some historians have theories based on where some of her children were buried, where some oral accounts dictate things. Again, that is one of those opportunities for further exploration that we would absolutely absolutely love to have more of. All right. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, looks like we have another question here. It's not opening. It's not coming through. Ooh, okay, so we have another question here about Freedman's Village. Yes, the Gray family was connected to Freedman's Village in that transition period between leaving the Arlington estate proper and then purchasing their post-war home in the Green Valley neighborhood. That is true. Oh, sorry, I missed a question here. Another good one here. How was the Gray family able to acquire the resources to purchase what would become their home in the Knock community? Well, that is another one where the record is a little vague. Sadly, the income tax returns do not exist, or if the financial records do, they're not something that I've been able to access. I can tell you that in their lives after the war, they did take up farming. They actually sold produce in Washington, D.C., and that was the primary way they made their income. So, other than just that ability to fall back on the farming institution, there is still plenty of mystery there. All right. How many children did she have? So the Gray family has 8 children total. 6 girls, 2 boys, I believe. And like I said, a lot of them are going to remain in Arlington. And to this day, Selina Norris Gray has descendants that are still living in Arlington County and very active in the local community. Oh, thank you. And again, thank you all for coming. Yes, so the recording will be available most likely by tomorrow. If you registered for this program, if you know anyone who registered, you will receive a link to the video as well. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Will do, Rachel. You do the same. All right, folks. Well, then just to wrap it up a little bit, if you are curious about the Selina Norris Gray story, or indeed other history occurrences throughout Arlington County, there are a couple places that are readily available to you for further exploration. Again, much like the rest of the museums, they are closed for operations right now, but they are trying to find new ways to reach other audiences. So for Arlington County history outside of Arlington County parks, we always recommend that you check out the Arlington Historical Society and the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington. Both of those organizations have been instrumental in preserving different aspects of Arlington County history, and we are so happy to have them. All right, folks. Well, if that is it, I may just go ahead and end the meeting right now. Again, thank you all for coming out tonight and hearing our brief little introduction into the life and times of Selina Norris Gray. I hope you all enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll go out there and try to learn more. Once again, this was John from Arlington County Department of Parks and Recreation saying thank you for supporting our programs, and we can't wait to see you at the parks. Take care, everyone.